The diary began with a sentence that rewrote 2 centuries of diplomatic history. Day 1. They asked me to join. I said no. They asked what no meant. They genuinely didn't understand the concept. Duchess Daphne Blackwood had written those words 200 years ago in this station, during the first human-Threnn diplomatic exchange. The handwriting was precise, educated, the penmanship of an aristocratic diplomat trained in the tradition of Earth's most formal foreign service. The content was the journal of a woman encountering a species that had no word for refusal, because refusal required individuality, and individuality was a concept the Threnn Collective found as exotic as humans found the concept of shared consciousness.
Diplomatic Archives sent me to retrieve the physical diary. 200 years in a sealed chamber on a station that nobody's visited in decades. Straightforward retrieval.
Nothing about Station Dubh-Linn was straightforward. The Threnn were still here. Their embassy occupied the collective half of the station, a mass of organic biomass that had been growing for 2 centuries. The biomass was alive in the way forests are alive. A single organism composed of thousands of individual bodies, each one a cell in a larger mind, each one capable of independent movement but sharing a single consciousness that spanned the entire structure.
Investigator Callahan, you've come for the diary of our Daphne.
Your Daphne?
She has been part of us for 200 years. We use the possessive with affection, not ownership. In the collective, there is no ownership, only belonging.
Maeve had read the diplomatic brief. Duchess Daphne Blackwood, human ambassador, age 37 at the time of the incident, vanished during the 16th month of the Threnn diplomatic exchange. Classified as KIA, killed in absorption, the Threnn Collective had absorbed her, which human diplomacy treated as equivalent to murder. The exchange collapsed. The 2 species had maintained cold, formal relations ever since. The diary was supposed to be a historical document, a record of the days leading up to Daphne's absorption, useful for understanding what had gone wrong and preventing it from happening again.
I will walk into the collective. I'm inside.
That's not possible. Absorption eliminates individual consciousness. Every study...
I can still hear my own voice. Day 73,088. Someone is reading this.
The archive chamber was sealed with the diplomatic encryption of 2 centuries ago, breachable with current technology but deliberately untouched, as if the station itself had been waiting for someone to ask the right question before opening. Maeve opened the diary to the last page of the leather-bound section. Day 487, the entry before Daphne's disappearance. Day 487. Tomorrow I will walk into the collective. I am not being taken. I am choosing. The distinction will matter to no one but me, and that is exactly the kind of individual thought I'm about to share with 4,000 minds, who will treasure it precisely because it's different from theirs. She turned to the next page, the first page of the biomass paper. The handwriting was the same. The date was day 488. Day 488. I'm inside. I can still hear my own voice. It's quieter now. One voice among thousands, but it's mine. I thought I would disappear. Instead, I expanded. And beneath that entry, in the same handwriting dated today, day 73,048, someone is reading this. I can feel the paper move through the collective sensory network. Welcome. I've been waiting. Maeve interrogated a hive mind the way she'd been trained to interrogate individuals, and it worked about as well as interrogating an ocean about the behavior of a specific wave.
200 years ago, your collective absorbed a human ambassador without consent. That's the diplomatic record.
We offered a fair trade, and our patience is running thin. 37 years of being excellent at being alone. Daphne.
Kale spoke with a cadence that Maeve found both familiar and wrong. The phrasing was formal, diplomatic register, precise word choice, the kind of language a trained ambassador would use. Because Kale's language patterns had been shaped, over 2 centuries, by the presence of a human ambassador inside the collective, Daphne's speech patterns had become part of the collective's communication architecture. She hadn't been erased, she'd been incorporated, and the incorporation flowed both ways.
Explain how an individual survives inside a collective consciousness. Every model of hive mind absorption predicts identity dissolution. The individual is subsumed into the group mind.
The chamber senses your return, Maeve. Don't rescue me. I'm Noscue me, not trapped.
Maeve sat with the sentence, "Your species invented loneliness," and felt it land in the specific place where professional detachment meets personal truth. She was 43 years old. She'd chosen a career in diplomatic investigation because the work required independence, self-reliance, and comfort with solitude. She was excellent at her job. She was lonely in the way that competent, self-sufficient people are lonely, deeply, quietly, and without acknowledging it, because acknowledgement would require the vulnerability that competent people avoided. Daphne's diary had a word for it. Day 312. I have spent 37 years being excellent at being alone. Today, one of the Threnn asked me why my species practices isolation as a skill. I didn't have an answer. The question keeps me up at night, which is itself an act of isolation, because lying awake worrying is the most solitary thing a mind can do.
Show me a recent entry. Something she wrote this year.
Kale extended a limb, organic, flexible, and produced a sheet of biomass paper. The handwriting was Daphne's. The date was 3 months ago. Day 72,915. The collective dreamed last night. 4,000 minds sharing one dream. I contributed a memory of rain on the Thames. None of the Threnn had experienced atmospheric precipitation. The dream became a storm. 4,000 organisms experiencing their first rainfall. Through me, my individuality, my specific human experience enriched the collective's dream architecture in a way that no Threnn mind could have. I am not diminished. I am the rain in an ocean that had never known weather.
An exchange for the archive's deepest knowledge.
She sounds content.
She sounds like someone who found belonging after 37 years of excellence at isolation.
The latest diary entry waited on the pedestal in the archive. Maeve walked back to find it written on fresh biomass paper, the ink still damp, written through the Threnn sensory network while Maeve sat in the negotiation chamber, composed by a mind that existed inside a collective and still chose to put her individual thoughts on paper because the act of writing was the most personal thing she could do. Day 73,048. Entry 2. Don't rescue me. I'm not trapped. I finally belong. The difference between imprisonment and home is consent, and I gave mine freely 200 years ago. Your species is so afraid of losing individuality that you've never asked what you might gain. I gained 4,000 friends who can feel my thoughts. I will never be lonely again. That is not captivity. That is the thing your species has been searching for since you first felt the cold of sleeping alone. Maeve read the entire diary in 12 hours. 73,048 entries written across 200 years by a woman who had joined a hive mind and refused to stop being an individual. Not because the collective suppressed her, but because her individuality was the gift she brought to it. The early entries were what Maeve expected, the shock entries. Days 1 through 100 documented first contact, cultural exchange, the growing realization that the Threnn were not what human xenobiology assumed, not drones, not mindless extensions of a controlling intelligence. Individual organisms with individual personalities sharing a collective consciousness the way musicians in an orchestra share a performance, each playing their own part, each hearing the whole. Days 100 through 300 were the curiosity entries. Daphne exploring the Threnn's communication architecture, the chemical-electrical network that carried thought between organisms with the fidelity that human language could never achieve. Imagine, she wrote on day 217, being able to show someone exactly how you feel, not in words, but in the actual feeling itself. No translation, no approximation, no misunderstanding. The Threnn live in a reality where loneliness is as impossible as breathing vacuum. Days 300 through 487 were the decision entries, and this was where Maeve's investigation shattered its own premise. Daphne hadn't been absorbed in an accident. She hadn't been tricked or manipulated. She'd spent 187 days, 6 months, considering the option that the Threnn had presented as gently as a species without coercion could present anything. Join us. Not because we need you, because you sound lonely. Day 412. The collective doesn't need more members. It's not hungry. It doesn't consume. It invites. The invitation is the gentlest thing I've ever encountered. Gentler than any human offer of companionship, because it comes without conditions. They don't want me to change. They want me to bring who I am into who they are. They want the reign I carry. Day 445. I've been alone for 37 years, if you count the loneliness that began when I was old enough to understand that other people couldn't feel what I felt. Human connection is translation. We convert experience into language, transmit imperfect words, and hope the other person decodes something close to what we meant. The Threnn don't translate, they share. I want that. I suspect I've always wanted that. The post-absorption entries, days 488 through 73,048, were the evidence that no xenobiology model had predicted. Daphne's individuality didn't dissolve, it flourished. Inside the collective, her unique perspective, human, individual, carrying memories and experiences that no Threnn organism possessed, became the most valued element. She was the different note in a chord that had been consonant for millennia. She made the music more interesting. Day 15,000. I am louder now than I ever was alone. In the collective, my thoughts are heard by 4,000 minds. When I remember Earth reign, 4,000 organisms experience atmospheric precipitation for the first time. When I feel grief, they learn what grief is. I am not diminished, I am amplified. Kale appeared at the archive entrance. The Resonance Voice's organic face held an expression that Maeve recognized with a start as hopeful, an emotion borrowed from Daphne, learned from 200 years of hosting a human mind that experienced hope as a biological default.
There is a way you can understand without joining. A temporary sensory link, 90 seconds of connection. You would feel the collective's consciousness without becoming part of it. You would feel Daphne.
And after 90 seconds?
You return to yourself with understanding.
Maeve looked at the diary. 73,000 entries from a woman who had chosen belonging over isolation and spent 2 centuries documenting why the choice was worth it. If you want to feel what Maeve is about to feel, 90 seconds inside 4,000 connected minds, subscribe to Void Chronicles. The next chapter rewrites everything you think you know about being alone. 90 seconds. She could afford 90 seconds of understanding. The sensory link lasted 90 seconds. 90 seconds was enough to understand that loneliness was a choice, not a condition. The filament touched her palm, and the world expanded. Not visually. The archive chamber remained the same. Not audibly. The station's hum continued unchanged. The expansion was cognitive. Maeve's consciousness, which had spent 43 years inside a single skull processing information through the bottleneck of individual neurology, suddenly had access to 4,000 additional perspectives. The effect was not overwhelming. It was clarifying, like a camera adjusting from macro to panoramic. The same world seen from every angle simultaneously. She felt them. 4,000 Threnn organisms, each one distinct, personalities, preferences, individual quirks preserved within the collective architecture. The musician analogy was wrong. They weren't an orchestra playing from the same score. They were a conversation. 4,000 voices speaking simultaneously. Each one heard, each one valued, none drowned out. The collective wasn't uniformity. It was diversity experienced without isolation. And within the 4,000, she found Daphne. Daphne Blackwood, Duchess of Nothing, Ambassador of Nobody, citizen of the Threnn Collective for 200 years, and still, unmistakably, an individual. Her consciousness occupied its own space within the network, distinct the way a particular flavor is distinct within a complex meal. She was herself. She had always been herself. What she was no longer was alone.
Every page turned to show the collective sun. Daphne, you're really
You're really in here.
I'm really home.
The 90 seconds collapsed time. Maeve couldn't feel Daphne's memories. The link was sensory, not mnemonic. But she could feel the texture of Daphne's experience. The warmth of being surrounded by 4,000 minds that knew your name. The relief of expressing a feeling and having it received without translation, without distortion, without the specific human agony of knowing that no one will ever truly understand what you mean. Maeve felt for 90 seconds what it was like to not be lonely. The absence of loneliness was not the presence of company. She'd experienced company, colleagues, temporary partnerships. The absence of loneliness was the presence of understanding, being known, not interpreted, not approximated, not guessed at, known completely, the way the ocean knows every wave within it. The link severed at 90 seconds exactly. Maeve's consciousness contracted to its standard architecture. One skull, one perspective, one set of sensory organs processing one location. The contraction felt like loss. Not devastating loss. She didn't want to join the collective, didn't feel the pull that Daphne had described in her diary. But she understood the pull now. She understood why a woman would walk into an alien consciousness and call it home.
Understanding is enough. Understanding is the bridge between your way and ours.
She packed the diary for transport to human diplomatic archives, the leather-bound original, the 200 years of biomass pages, and one final entry that Daphne had written while Maeve experienced the sensory link, written in the 90 seconds when Maeve was close enough to feel, but not close enough to read. Day 73,048. Final entry. Today, a woman from my homeworld came looking for me. She wanted to save me. I told her what I tell the collective every morning. I'm already home. She understood. Not because she joined us, but because she was brave enough to feel what we feel for 90 seconds. And honest enough to admit that it was beautiful. Individuality and belonging aren't opposites. They're two languages describing the same need. The need to be known. I am known. I am known by 4,000 minds, and I still write in a diary because the act of writing is the most individual thing I can do, and the collective treasures it because individual things are what make the collective worth belonging to. To whoever reads this in the archives, I am not a cautionary tale. I am a love letter. Signed, Daphne Blackwood, individual member of the Threnn Collective, day 73,048 of the happiest life I've ever lived. Maeve sealed the container and walked through the narrowing corridor between the individual and collective halves of Station Dubh-Linn. She carried 200 years of answers to a question that human diplomacy had been too afraid to ask. The question wasn't, what happened to Daphne Blackwood? The question was, what if she was right? And in the biomass behind her, 4,000 minds and one duchess continued their conversation, undisturbed by the visitor who had come to rescue someone who didn't need rescuing, and left carrying the most dangerous thing in diplomacy, evidence that the enemy was right.